Hey guys, welcome back. Welcome back, Fear Minimalists. It's Ophelia Lark of thefearminimalist.com, and I help women of color break the emotional cycle, the fear-based emotional cycle that maintains mother wound trauma. And so before we dive into what I'm going to share today, I want to remind you guys that if this is your first time here, welcome. And if you enjoy the content, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and make sure that you get all of the notifications when I upload a new video every single week by clicking on the bell that says all subscribe, so you'll get all the notifications and not just some of them, okay? I'm going to discuss the theft of womanhood and how the historical, the intergenerational, the impact of oppressive institutions have robbed women of color, and particularly black and brown women, of the ability to develop into our womanhood and particularly into motherhood. And so, guys, I am ready to share that story with you. We're going to start from a historical perspective, and then it is going to segue into my own personal story. And then I'm going to share a strategy that you can use to create a different legacy. So hang in there. Let's go. So anytime I talk about the mother wound or matrilineal trauma, I always consider the historical and intergenerational impact of oppressive patriarchal systems and their role in shaping the experience of black and brown women and black and brown people, really, but particularly women in America, in North America. And I do this because I personally feel like, the more I know about my history, the better position I will be to ask for what I need as a black woman in America. We know that due to colonization centuries ago, that most of American culture reflects Western traditions. So how we educate our children, so the education system, the medical and the mental health systems, the political systems, the economic systems, and even the entertainment systems that a lot of times control and regulate what we see on TV and the internet. And so I want to start with a historical story, and then it'll segue into my own personal story about the theft of womanhood and subsequently motherhood, and how that is actually perpetuated through the mother wound. How these patriarchal systems provide an underpinning for the continued threat to womanhood, black and brown womanhood, and motherhood in modern society. Let me start there. So back in the 1930s, the United States began collecting stories of ex-slaves through several different writing projects. There was a Fisk University ex-slave project. Fisk is a HBCU, Historically Black College and University. And then there was the Federal Writers Project, I think, and then there was the Works Progress Administration ex-slave project. There was a lady by the name of Annie Ruth Davis, and she represented the Works Progress ex-slave project. And she interviewed this ex-slave named Josephine Backus about her life, growing up. And I think Backus was actually a child during the Civil War, but she remembered how she had lost her mother at a very young age. And she talked about the bereavement and the grief that came out of that. And how, to her, there was obviously, she didn't know about intergenerational stuff, but the way that she told the story, it connected the generations. It was almost like this seamless sort of passing on of the psychological and the emotional and the bodily experiences of the generations to her. So she felt that the loss of her mother robbed her, not just psychologically through grief, but also bodily through her inability to have a full-term pregnancy. She just kept having miscarriages and miscarriages. And she believed that because she had lost her mother and she had not received the care that a child needed from a mother due to the horrors of slavery. Possibly her mother died of some type of physical ailment due to the horrific nature of the slave life. And she just remembered her mother like laying on the table and them doing like a ritual over her, getting ready to bury her and that kind of thing. And that was the image. That was the narrative. That was what was seared in her mind. And so she began to create this narrative around that experience and the experience of just growing up in the context of bondage. And so the narrative had become, because of this experience, because of this second-class way of life, I'm not able to be a woman in the way that a woman is supposed to be, which for her, she defined it as being able to have children and to grow a full-term baby and to actually have that baby and to raise that child. And so for her, the narratives were more about being able, because this is pretty much the only way that women and men, for that matter, but we're talking about motherhood and how that was stolen through the patriarchy, through white supremacy. And so not being able to bear a child and to experience a full range of emotions around the life that created that narrative for her. The goal was to tell a story where you could always remember and never forget the pain that created that life. And those narratives were passed down from grandmothers to mothers to daughters, on and on throughout the generations. And so the purpose was to remember. The purpose was to commemorate, to document, as a way to keep future generations safe. But somewhere in the process of all of that, so that was the original intention of telling these stories. It was this happened, that happened, that happened. There wasn't any resolution really of the trauma. It was just a story so that people would know. It is the ability to be witnessed, to be heard. I want you to hear my pain. Like, I know there's probably nothing you can do about it, but not being ignored. Somebody wanted to hear your story. So that is the foundation that Back has laid. Now enter the narratives of patriarchy, of white supremacy, laced with stereotypes about Black women's bodies, about brown women's bodies, what they deserved, what they didn't deserve because they were not European women bodies. How, you had a place, and if you didn't stay in that place, this is what would happen to you. So a lot of Black and brown women were, especially slave women, if they talked back or if there was some kind of offense that the master felt there was an offense, and they wanted to punish the woman, and if she was pregnant, they would cut a hole in the ground, make her put her belly in the ground so that she wouldn't lose the baby, because the baby was obviously growing to become a slave so that they can keep the slave labor, the numbers up, because it was a business. We know that. And so it was a way to protect the assets. So mom would put her belly in the hole, and then they would beat her, as if beating is not going to create stress that could cause a miscarriage. So the bodily violence, the bodily suffering, mothers being stripped from their baby so they can go and breastfeed the white woman's baby to care for her children all day long, while her children who cares, right? So Black women in particular have always lived with in this constant state of mourning and grief about womanhood, about motherhood. How do I protect that? How do I have autonomous womanhood? How do I have autonomous motherhood in a place that has not made room for me to grow into that, right? And so enter the narratives that are not just about telling the story of what happened so that we can remember, but narratives underpinned by stereotypes, the patriarchal narratives. So here comes the systems, the Western traditions. And many of our mothers bought into that because, a lot of it is that they didn't know any better. Another huge part of it is that the stories that we were supposed to remember about our pain lost context over time. And when the stories lose context over time, it just becomes a story that you tell. The whole narrative of telling the story to remember became now embracing the patriarchal narratives about what our bodies are supposed to do and not do, and where we're supposed to be and not be, and all of this policing and controlling about how we're supposed to have babies, or when we're supposed to have babies, or if we're supposed to have babies, or if we're supposed to be this kind of woman or that kind of woman. And a lot of our mothers embraced those stereotypes of the patriarchy. And so for my mother in particular, not only did the story that Bacchus described as one that, that is implemented so that we can remember our pain, it now became a story of fear and shame. You should be ashamed to dress like that or wear your hair like that. I remember a story, or not a story, but a situation when I was growing up where it was, you would be considered a wicked woman if you wore pants, if you wore your hair in braids and had beads in it, if you wore any kind of makeup or anything like that. And so I remember my mom saying to me, "You're not going to bring shame to me." Like, I asked her if I could have beads, because my cousins, we used to go to our cousins' house, and my cousins had beads, and I loved beads, like Alicia Keys, from the Fallen album, or Serena and Venus Williams. I wanted to look like that, but as a little girl, and that's because I saw my cousins with it, and I asked my mom if I could have beads, and she was like, "No, you can't have no beads. That's for wicked people. That's for wicked kids. That's for wicked women. We don't wear beads in this house." And I just remember going, "What? What? I don't understand." And so anyway, that was the narrative. The message became, you should be ashamed to ask me something like that. Don't ask me about that again. Because that's not what we do in our house. We're trying to be honorable, moral people. And the fear came from the fear that my mother instilled in me. Obviously, this is patriarchy. She primarily used religion. So what I should say, I should have prefaced that by saying that a lot of the messaging that my mother took on, in addition to losing the context around some of the stories that she would tell me, the new messaging that she took on was that of fear and shame-based messaging. So she would use the Bible and religion to instill fear into me. I remember this one time she told me this story about, there was a story in the Old Testament where there was this prophet and he was preaching or whatever, and these kids started making fun of him because, he was bald-headed. And she was like, the prophet got mad and he invoked the spirits from heaven or whatever, and it called forth this bear out of the woods, and he ate the kids up, tore them all into all these pieces or whatever. And my mom would say, that can happen to you, right? If you disobey me, if you do what I tell you not to do, if you try to be sneaky or whatever, that can happen to you. And that's how she instilled fear into me. So the messages became, you should be ashamed to be a woman, to embrace, to express yourself in a particular way. And you better not dare disobey me when I tell you not to do something, because you know what could happen to you. And so I said all that to say that when you are raised in that kind of environment with those kinds of messagings particularly from the woman who is supposed to be teaching you how to be a woman and eventually how to be a mother, you don't grow into fully being yourself, fully expressing yourself. You don't develop this identity. You don't know who you are. You don't develop autonomous selfhood. And so now I'm just this little infant, little child kid walking around, even though I'm 18, 19, 20 years old, and I'm scared of everything. I'm fearful if I make this decision, it might be the wrong one and God might punish me. I won't tell you what age I was when I stopped, but I would have nightmares so badly that I would literally pee in the bed because of the fear that my mother instilled in me. I was well into adulthood when I stopped peeing in the bed, guys. Now, I didn't think I would reveal that, but that's how deep the trauma was. That's how deep the trauma was. And I was scared. I would always have these dreams about still being at home with my mom, with my dad, sleeping in the bed with all my sisters. And I was a grown woman with a master's degree. And I'd shake myself and go, why am I putting up with all this? I have a master's degree. I can go get a job, this and that. But a lot of it had to do with the shame the subconscious shame that was still embedded and the fear that was still embedded in me. And the indoctrination from the religious text and my mom really being committed to indoctrinating us. It robbed me of a lot of things. And I should also add that there's a high prevalence of people with adverse childhood experiences who have polycystic ovarian syndrome, which I was diagnosed with when I was 26 years old. So now we're going into the science of it, where the research shows that ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, can lead to not just mental health, emotional health problems, but also physical health problems. And with that high prevalence of people with ACEs, of women having PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome, that there's a link between those two. So now I'm not just suffering physically or mentally and emotionally, but I'm also suffering physically. I have struggled with an eating disorder since I was 18 years old. I've struggled with depression and PTSD for a long time. And so what I'm saying is that historically, suffering carried over into more recent times. And when you lose context around that, you don't know what the story is, and then you start taking on somebody else's story about you, that's what happens. The trauma not only gets passed down from one generation to the other, but it becomes this thing that if you're not able to overcome it, then life just ends up being this big hamster wheel. You keep going around and around. I wonder what's wrong. I wonder what's wrong. And nobody comes to their senses and says, let's talk about where you've been. Let's talk about where you are now. And let's talk about where you want to go. So how did I get from understanding the historical, the personal, to a place of wanting to create a different legacy? Well, it took a lot of things. For me, it took therapy, it took support groups, it took getting on medication, it took a lot of grieving, it took a lot of breaks, of rests, going on vacations, being witnessed by another securely attached person. It took a lot of things for a lot of years for me to be able to get in front of this camera and to just start talking about trauma. And then to get to the point to where now I can tell my personal story of all of these different ways that the theft of motherhood and the theft of womanhood was passed down through the generations. And it's not just that they robbed you of it. It became a way of being, a way of, you're living as a robbed woman. You're born as a robbed woman or robbed female. You don't get to grow into womanhood or subsequently motherhood. Because the narrative around that is that you can't fully be yourself. Because you are not supposed to have this kind of expression. And, so that becomes a problem. The solution that has worked for me is that, as I said, I've gone through all of those different interventions, but it essentially boils down to creating a different narrative. I just kept telling a different story, a different story, a different story, a different story. Even when the inner critic would come and bear down heavily on me and say, you're not going to overcome it. Are you crazy? You're not going to overcome that. That's always going to be on your mind. And I would say, even so, I'm going to have compassion on myself. Because a lot of this was not my fault. I am not going to take responsibility for somebody in such a blind state, and all they could do, or most of what they could do, was teach me how not to be myself. I'm not going to take responsibility for that. I'm on the journey to become myself, to be who I was inherently meant to be. And so that's the journey that I've been on. Is reclaim, as Maxine Waters says, reclaiming my time, reclaiming my womanhood, reclaiming my motherhood. For the longest time, I did not know how to really embrace motherhood. It wasn't just about me feeling like, oh, I'm not good. A lot of mothers feel like that. Like, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. It was me feeling like I was not worthy of being a mother. Because I had not worked through being worthy of being a woman first. And so the birth of my son brought about an opportunity for me to face that for the first time. What's it like to be a woman? What's it like to reclaim something that was stolen from me or I was born into? I was born into robbery of my femaleness, of my womanhood. So anyway, telling a different story every day. I would say, even so, I'm going to keep telling this story because the story of who I learned to be, despite who I really am, is not the real story. The real story is that I am inherently me. When I ask, who am I? I'm me. That's who I am. And however I come out, however I express myself, that is acceptable. As long as it's not creating harm to other people, it's okay to be me. And I want to inspire you and encourage you to think the same. It's okay to be you. It is okay to be you. You are seen. You are heard. And I want you to be yourself. whatever it takes for you to pull off the mask, to take off the shields, to take off all of the things that have covered you up, that have covered up your authentic self. Right now, right here, in this moment, you can be who you've always wanted to be or who you were meant to be. And some of you are going to be discovering this for the first time. Who am I as whatever your name is? Who am I as this woman? A lot of you would like to be mothers, but you just don't know if you can be. And I would start saying, work on reclaiming your womanhood, your autonomous selfhood. Who you are is who you are. It's not who somebody trained you to be, because they trained you to be that. That's not who you are. My mom trained me to be ashamed of myself. She would always say, you should be ashamed of yourself. She would always say that. And eventually, I was ashamed of myself. Because she always, the person who was teaching me how to be told me that I should be ashamed of myself. So I was for a long time. So guys, let me know your stories. Let me know in the comments below if this resonated with you. If you liked this video, hit the like button below, share with your friends, drop a comment, as I said, to let me know what you took away. And don't forget to subscribe, hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell, so that you'll always be in the know when I upload new videos every single week. And like I said before I left, and I will continue to say, that the sun is going to rise and shine bright tomorrow. The question is, are you going to rise with it and allow your best self to shine? I hope you do, and I will see you next time. Have a great day.